Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another edition of RecruitMilitary Live, a continuing series of live broadcasts covering all things military transition, veteran employment, mil-spouse employment, and much, much more. My name is Lucas Connolly, retired U.S. Army officer and former TAP program manager, here to share with you the ins and outs of navigating the turbulent waters of civilian employment. If you're in search of meaningful employment, well, you're in the right place. Please visit rmvets.com/live to learn more. Okay, well, let's take a look. We have a great transition story today, so buckle up. There's a lot to go through. Transitioning from the military into civilian employment presents a unique set of challenges, as many of you already know, but it also has a unique set of opportunities. Many service members are looking for opportunities in the defense sector, government contracts, and law enforcement. It's something they're comfortable with, and many of us have tried to break in. If that sounds like you, then don't touch that mouse, because today's guest has figured out how to get into all three of those spheres of employment, and he's learned a lot along the way. Excuse me. Today's guest has a professional career that reads like the prelude to an action movie. He started his military career as a U.S. Army nuclear, biological, chemical weapons specialist before taking part in the invasion of Iraq. While in the reserves, he started another career in civilian law enforcement, earning his place on the police force of Overland Park, Kansas. Very nice town. In uniform, he transitioned to Army Civil Affairs and was deployed to some of the most hostile real estate in Afghanistan. Most people go home after deployment, but not this fellow. Instead of kicking back with a cup of coffee and looking at old photos, he decided to work with NATO, and more specifically with the LEP community, as a rule of law field support officer working with the Afghan police force. Now, this is going to sound a little bit like a late night commercial, but wait, there's more. He leveraged all these experiences to break into the defense sector, working with military and law enforcement community for well-known equipment and firearms manufacturers like CZ USA and Lancer Systems. Ladies and gentlemen, please give it up for Mr. Andrew Eager. Welcome, Andrew Eager, to the show today.
Thanks, Lucas. I appreciate you having me on, bud.
Andrew, really great to have you show. I'm glad you could make the time. All right, folks, now that you know who we are, we want to hear who you are. Who are you with? Who you served with? Where are you at right now? Have you retired? Are you in transition? Are you National Guard or Reserves? Active duty, thinking about transition or retirement? Or some other status that we haven't thought of? Please feel free to hit us up in the chat. And if you've got questions, comments, issues, or concerns, feel free to lay them out there in the chat. And given enough time, we will address them. Andrew, your story is either all over the place or just fraught with adventure. I don't know if it's pure chaos or an absolute adventure. Let's, as they say, begin at the beginning. How is it that you went from sitting in a college classroom to standing in front of a recruiter's desk?
Honestly, I think it was just the time and place. To tell you the truth, it was this journey is completely random. I went to college for wildlife biology. So I was going to Kansas State University, wildlife biology, and halfway through my sophomore year, I guess it would have been, about halfway through my sophomore year, 9/11 happened. And 9/11 was probably, to this date, one of the most significant events in recent American history. And a lot of the GWAT crew came out of that post 9/11 enlistment period. So completely not intended, but that's exactly how it happened. 9/11 happened, and I dropped out of school within a week and found myself in a recruiter office and taking an ASVAB. And next thing I know, in January of 2002, I was already in basic training.
Awesome. So talk about, for a minute, if you will, your first experience deploying over to
Sure.
Wonderful Iraq.
So as you know, one of the first things that happened was when I enlisted, I didn't know too much about the military. So I actually asked the recruiter, what would be the first MOS that would send me overseas? And so obviously with the nuclear, biological, and chemical weapons threat in Iraq, that was a priority. So I ended up becoming MBC NCO for a battalion that was just outside Fort Riley, Kansas. And was deployed to Iraq in February of 2003 before the initial invasion. Got to spend some time in Kuwait responding to Scud alarms. Ended up having to go across the border in full MOP. I think I crossed the border April 1st, 2003, which was about 3 days after main body. But yeah, so NBC guy in the beginning, the battalion commander raised his hands like, I want that NBC guy in my truck. So I ended up riding around a lot of Iraq with my battalion commander, basically as TSD and emergency NBC guy. Got all the way up to Baghdad, stopped when the red line was there. Once we realized that the red line was kind of non-existent, Third ID took Baghdad, and immediately after we took Baghdad, we actually responded to the Baghdad International train station to see if we were able to get rails up to move logistics support up and down the rail track, the rail line in Iraq. So that's kind of how I ended up in as an NBC guy in Iraq, and ended up doing TSD basically for the rest of my deployment as security detail, since there was no real chemical threat. So that's,
little must have been a little bit of disappointment there. Not that any of us wants to find a live active weapon site full of VX and nerve gas, but there wasn't much to find.
Yeah, no, honestly, we had to go into full MOP gear a couple times. We were on Talil Air Base, which was just northwest of Nasiriyah, Iraq, by the Temple of Ur. And believe it or not, actually, when we got on there, I think the 82nd had taken Talil at the time, and they were on the west side of the Euphrates, and the Marine Corps was on the east side. Anyway, when we took the airbase in Talil, there must have been a chemical weapons training facility, because there was NBC protection and test kits and stuff all over Talil. And actually, one of the, I think,
hey buddy, I'm on a call, so be silent, please.
One of the vehicles that was there was a Fox vehicle, which looks very much like a Striker. Ended up driving over a tiny little chemical kit or something like this, set off the alarm, and the entire facility had to go into MOP gear. But that was about the extent of my NBC, and I'm pretty happy that I didn't have any interaction with it.
Apologies for the hot mic moment there. Live show, sometimes things happen.
No, you're good.
I tell you what, those Fox vehicles, and correct me if I'm wrong, they got mistaken for BTR 70s, and I heard some of the guys in recon were getting shot at by the Cav.
I honestly, the thing that I could tell you they remind me most of is the Striker. I didn't, obviously the Striker units were kind of new in 2004 with the 2nd Infantry Division, so I had never really seen many of them. They were replacing, I think, either 113s or Bradleys or something at the time. But yeah, man, they reminded me of the Striker modern day. I think they've got 8 wheels. They have an overpressure system to where the air conditioning, even if you open the doors, nothing can come in. They have all sorts of recon, decon, and then we had smoke vehicles too. So,
well, anybody that's had to operate in MOP gear in Baghdad in the middle of the summer, a tip of the hat to you, sir. I did it for about 20 minutes, and I think I'll never recover from it psychologically.
Yeah.
So you come back from Iraq. Tell me a little bit about the return. Now, you left as a college student. You come back as a seasoned combat veteran. What's that experience like?
Well, I wouldn't, I as much as I would love to say seasoned combat veteran, yes, experienced combat veteran. One of the things I will tell you, the difference between Iraq and Afghanistan was the type of fighting, and we can get into that a little bit later. But basically, through my trips through Iraq, I was after the chemical threat had gone. Essentially, all I did is escort and security for coalition troops moving within Iraq. So I would take the coalition forces that were coming in to replace the 2nd Marines or the 82nd or whoever it was, and we would move those, the Spanish or the Polish or whatever, up throughout Iraq to those locations to replace U.S. troops. I honestly really enjoyed it. It was very much, providing escort and security. We're making sure that people were safe. You were traveling through dangerous towns. It was something that I really enjoyed doing. And, when I got back from Iraq and got back to the U.S., the world had moved on without me. Like you've seen and hear from many, many veterans, the world just moves on. Nobody stands still. So when I got back from Iraq, I'd spent about 13 months there. My friends had graduated and they were gone. At the time, I didn't know what to do. I didn't know if I was supposed to go back and get my degree. I didn't know, what I was supposed to do. I'd just done all of this crazy stuff, and now I was expected to go back and sit in a college classroom. It didn't work. I was angry from deployment, and you have all of those post-deployment issues that you're dealing with. And as a 23-year-old kid in the middle of college, first major, group of veterans coming back from a major conflict since Vietnam, it was a struggle at first, and I had to kind of redirect and figure out what I wanted to do. And I said, you know what, honestly, the thing that I align most with now is law enforcement. And so I decided to go back to Kansas City, and I left Manhattan, Fort Riley area, and as a reservist went to Kansas City and became a civilian law enforcement officer. And I did that for about 5 years, and absolutely loved it. It was definitely the tribe away from the military. When you leave the military, you leave your friends, you leave your community, you leave the uniform. I always like to say, you're doing God's work. You're putting in a very, very important job that is barely recognized. And while that is a good thing that you don't get the recognition, also at the same point in time, it really is hard on your mental aspect when you come back, because you realize that nobody cares what you've done. And the only thing you can do is recreate yourself as a civilian with those same, behavioral traits and that hard work ethic, and just use what the military taught you and drive it into something else. And law enforcement worked really well. I enjoyed chasing bad guys. I enjoyed putting myself between danger and people that were innocent. And so for me, law enforcement, it really did. It filled that gap where I was kind of floundering, and it gave me that sense of tribe or community back, because as cops, we all are there to do the same thing as we are in the military. That's watch each other's back and carry the legacy of that name after they've gone. And so it just was a natural fit. So that's kind of how I got into the law enforcement side of the house after returning from Iraq.
It's interesting. There's a culture shock associated with joining the military. You go into basic training, and as they say, they break you down. They teach you how to do everything. They teach you how to walk, talk, dress, eat, go off to war, and come back. And some would describe that experience as a reverse culture shock of trying to acclimate back to the pure civilian lifestyle. Now, there is kind of, I've seen in some cases, a bubble. I call it the military bubble. Defense sector, law enforcement, contract work, corrections. Did that feel like you had gone back to the civilian world, or you had kind of stayed inside the bubble with like-minded folks?
Oh, I was definitely in the bubble, and I'm still in the bubble today. That bubble is, once you're in it, you either have to completely separate yourself from it intentionally by design, or you stay, kind of on the outskirts. Depends on where you want to be. But honestly, to tell you the truth, it definitely was my group. A lot of the guys that I worked with were prior military. They're retired or previous military. A lot of them have been on the TAC teams and SWAT teams. And so, to tell you the truth, the thought process is the same. Learning the acronyms is a little bit different. Going from Alpha and Bravo to Adam and Boy. Man, I got made fun of on the radio so many times for using military phonetics, and then I would use civilian phonetics on the military side of the house. So that took a little bit of getting used to. Also realizing that in the Army, your goal is to overwhelm, and law enforcement is more to stand back and play defense. So definitely a little bit of growing, but it definitely matured me a lot. I probably saw more things as a law enforcement officer than I ever did as a soldier, unfortunately. So, when you talk about guys with PTSD or whatever, the amount of compound PTSD that law enforcement officers have to deal with is a struggle, man. And then so for that kind of mental connection and brotherhood connection, I think we share a lot. And so for me, it was just kind of a natural, it just fell out of one group into another.
Yeah, and that makes sense. I believe when police officers arrive on the scene, their primary goal is to de-escalate the situation and determine what's going on. Whereas in the military, it's an absolute tactical overmatch.
100%.
Identify the threat and destroy it and everything around it. So
Yeah.
But definitely now that interesting is you decided to stay inside the bubble. Now, if you had, I'll tell you what, we'll get to that next. Let's talk for a little bit about heading off to Afghanistan.
So I did Iraq in 2003, 2004. In 2005, when I started law enforcement in the Kansas City area, believe it or not, there happened to be, I was getting ready. My first enlistment was getting ready to end, and I had to make a decision. It's do I do it? Because I'm before 10 years. Do I do it or do I re-enlist? And I was really contemplating leaving. I even got into IRR, if that says anything. But there was a female police officer at Overland Park where I was working as a police officer, and she said, if you want to stay in, you can stay in. You can do all sorts of cool stuff. If you want to go to Ranger School, you want to go to Airborne, you want to go to Air Assault, you want to go do the schools. We have a civil affairs unit in Belton, Missouri, and I was like, "What's civil affairs?" Never heard of it. And at this point in time, I'd probably been in the military for about 5 years, I'd say. I think I was probably an E5 or E6 at the time. And, I was told they're like, man, there's civil affairs and PSYOP, and they're both under SOCOM. And this is in 2006. They're both under SOCOM, so you can go all the classes, you can do all the stuff. I was like, man, this really sounds cool. This is kind of what I wanted to do again. Let's check this out. So I went down and talked to this civil affairs unit in Belton, and I was like, they said the same thing. You want to go to school? You want to do all this? I said, yep, sure, no problem. So I raised my right hand again, and I said, yeah, I will, and I reclassed to civil affairs and never looked back. It was probably one of the greatest decisions I ever made. The freedom, leaving Big Army was just absolute blessing. People don't understand how much freedom and, how they treat you like a big kid when you get on to the other side of the house. So luckily for me, I was still in law enforcement at the time. Well, civil affairs, everybody tries to explain what civil affairs does. And realistically, civil affairs is a jack of all trades, master of none, right? We can do a lot of little things. Well, my specialty happened to be law enforcement, right? So I'd been a law enforcement officer. I'd been to Iraq. And at the time, it was 2012, and Afghanistan was under the direction, I believe it was Petraeus at the time, who was pushing the coin operation. And, my brigade had put out a message to all of the KCOMs underneath use of KPOC and said, hey, we need people in the legal realm. We need people that are either law enforcement officers or judges or prosecutors, whatever. We need somebody with a law enforcement background. And they wouldn't tell us what it is. They just said, hey, it's a rule of law mission. What's a rule of law mission? We don't know what that is. And so they plucked guys. First off, they offered them up, and I volunteered at the time. I was like, it's law enforcement on the street, so I want to be back in the field.
And so if I can interrupt there for a second, when we were talking about this, you said something interesting that captured my attention. Offhanded, you said, at that point in time, I felt like I didn't have anything to go home to, and I found that interesting, that thought. Could you maybe expound on that just a touch?
Yeah, honestly, as I was kind of walking away from the civilian law enforcement career, I was in the process of a divorce, and we'd sold the house, and we had a kid, but it was one of those things where I was sitting here looking at my life. I'm like, what am I going to do, man? Getting divorced, I don't have a house, I'm leaving, I need to figure something out. That's why I volunteered. I said, you know what, let's try this Afghanistan thing. We'll do it one more time. And it was a blessing and a curse, but I'm going to say it was more of a blessing. What they ended up doing was they sent a bunch of these CA guys. There were some mixed in folks from the Navy and the Air Force as well. We were attached to a joint interagency task force that was specifically a rule of law task force in Afghanistan. The goal for the U.S. coalition was basically, set up some type of jurisdiction to where, people aren't randomly killing people and they just get spanked on the hands, or, a wife cheats on her husband and gets stoned to death. They needed somewhere in the middle where that they can enforce the law. And so that was our job. They essentially threw us into the field and said, hey, we expect you to come up with a legal system that the Afghans can continue to work on. And so all of us were throwing our hands in the air. We're like, this is never going to work. This is never going to work, but we'll give her hell. And so
no
I
doubt,
did. I said,
no doubt, and absolutely challenging mission. I got to give credit to anybody that tried to navigate that environment. I had a commander of mine who used to say, nothing in Afghanistan is black and white. It's all a sea of shades of gray.
You are definitely not lying, man. And that it was just a struggle to figure out what I was supposed to do, because my command just said, do rule of law. And we don't know what it is, but figure it out. And so I went up there with a team chief, and I basically had, Nuristan, Logman, Kunar, Nangarhar. I had 4 provinces with just me and a team chief. And my team chief stayed at brigade, and all I did is fly around and go to these bases and, talk to the NDS, which is like the Afghan CIA, FBI, and then the ANP, and did targeting operations as a law enforcement officer, showing people how to do surveillance and, controlled buys, all of the stuff that you would do as a law enforcement officer here. Afghanistan, they were they were a reactive PD. They'd sit down and drink tea all day until somebody blew up, and then they'd go out and they'd pick pieces up with their hands, throw it in a sack, and then walk back home. There was no proactive law enforcement. So that was my goal, was to go out there and conduct proactive law enforcement, targeting through warrant-based targeting, DNA analysis, all that kind of stuff. And so my law enforcement background had actually served me exceptionally well in Afghanistan. It put me in contact with all sorts of people, from the DEA to the FBI, throughout multiple of the three-letter agencies. And it was awesome. Honestly, it was a blast. But it was very, very kinetic. It was much more kinetic than my Iraq deployment. But overall, the mission was amazing.
So let's talk, finish your time in Afghanistan, and for the second time, you are coming home.
Yeah.
Culture shock, need to adjust.
Oh, man.
Same sort of feelings? So
it was very much the same sort of feelings. I came home on leave. We actually were overrun in Afghanistan in early 2012, and it was a shocker. Definitely had some responses to loud music or loud noise or loud bangs. We got overrun, literally. So every time I would hear that loud explosion, it would definitely generate stuff. So coming back on leave, when I can remember specifically sitting in a restaurant, I went to go get some food with a friend, and I remember sitting in this place looking at all these people happy and drinking their beer and watching their sports, and just being so angry that there were people that were overseas that were losing their lives and that nobody cared. Everybody just went on with their day. But
I've heard this referred to as a shocking sense of normality.
It is, and it's 100, and it's very, very frustrating. It's almost, it angers you. And I had to come back and be like, look, this is why you're over there. You're over there so these people can do this every single day and never have to worry about a car bomb, or a guy with a suicide vest running up to their car. So this is what we're here for. And so it did take a little bit. Look, I'm still not fully back. There's still pieces of me that are over there, but you learn to adjust, and you learn to move forward, properly, I would say.
Right.
And that is
in a healthy way.
Yeah, exactly. And that, getting there will take time. But you just gotta have that community to lean on, whether it's the guys that are still in green suits or guys that have just gotten out and are welcoming you into the new fold. But yeah, it's very shocking to come back to that environment.
So now let's talk transition once again, another transition to now working for a civilian employer. Still, again, firearms manufacturing and associated equipment, still kind of within that military industrial complex bubble. But now this is a civilian company. It's in the United States. How was that?
What was really, this is where I want to say it was a little bit of luck. And I think we were talking about this before, is your resume will get you in the door. And that's it. That's all it will do. It will get you in the door. especially in the military, because you don't have that civilian career to fall back on. And, everybody talks civilian speak, but you have to learn how to translate that military lingo into the civilian side. So what ended up happening was, I guess, CZ had this, CZ had this job opportunity posted for about 48 hours, 72 hours, something like this. And coming back, same thing. I didn't want to be a cop. Not that I didn't like it, but it didn't pay enough to be in that kind of danger every day. And I feel bad for those guys. They definitely don't get paid for what they do. It's crazy. But I had the law enforcement, I had the military. While I was a cop, I actually finished off my degree, and I basically said, hey, I went to University of Phoenix. I said, look, I have 40 some credit hours. What's the fastest degree that'll get me through this? And they
heard this story before.
Criminal justice. Criminal justice. So criminal justice administration is where it landed, and so I ended up getting a bachelor's degree in criminal justice. But the bachelor's degree in criminal justice helped me. My law enforcement background helped me. My deployments in Afghanistan and Iraq helped me. So all of these military experiences, with the exception of law enforcement, they built this resume. I went to MCOES courses, PLDC. You go to BNOC, ANOC. All of these different leadership courses, which are absolutely amazing. That is very hard to come by outside of the military. And so I had all of this experience, and there was a little blip there between law enforcement in Iraq, where I worked for a company that did in-car video, laser, radar.
That's right.
I was an instructor. Anyway, that sales experience, that 1 year of sales experience in the law enforcement industry, was the difference between me and a dude with 20 or 30 years of law enforcement, or 30 years of military, 20 years of law enforcement, and 20 years of military. I had 5 years of law enforcement, I had 14 years of military, I had a bachelor's degree, and I had sales experience. And that bachelor's degree and that resume got me into the door. That's where it got me. And then it was up to me to decide how that interview was going to go and how I was going to control it. And being in the bubble, I realized that you rarely ever see guys in suits, right? And except for when you go to these big international conferences that are there's a lot of Europeans. It's a big European thing. But I noticed that everybody that would work these events was wearing cargos and a polo. So I made a decision. I said, you know what? I'm not going to go in there in a suit like everybody else. I'm not going to go in there and do the turn and dance. And
we're talking about the interview, right? The resume has got you the interview. Now it's the decision.
Yeah.
You go into the interview room and you make a tactical decision to dress more for the standards of the community than for the professional headshot. Sound right?
100%. So I decided to go the latter, and I wore, cargo pants and a long sleeve polo. And I walked into that interview room, and I expected something, some type. It was a firearms position, so I expected some gun or some question. And sure as hell, I walk in there and there's a rifle. And the rifle, they're like, all right, show me how to break it down, show me how to work, show me all of the actions. And it was very basic. I mean, anybody who knew their way around a gun could do it, but it was a very different interview experience that walk in and have a rifle in front of you. Honestly, I sat there and I talked to the guy who was interviewing me, who's now, a good friend. And this gentleman who was interviewing me was a retired chief of police, and he was a retired soldier. So he'd done both. And he had, seen all of these other resumes. And when I did get hired, he told me that it was the sales experience that made the difference. That 1 year of sales experience made the difference. So, if I could say anything about transition, the one thing is I'd say is, if you can take a lower paying job than what you're getting in the military and you can get into the defense industry, dude, take it. Because you might take a knock in salary like up front, but once you're in, you're in. And we'll get into this. I'm sure you've got some questions about this, but man, once you're in, you're in. And so that's how I kind of got into the defense industry with CZ USA.
And let me guess, you show up for your first day at work. They show you your brand new office with your shiny furniture. They give you an executive assistant, a team of 15 people to manage, and you're off to the races, right? Catastrophic success?
Yeah, no, it wasn't like that at all. I
No.
cleaned guns for him for about a year. So you got to eat your pride. You got to eat your pride coming out of a senior NCO position and going back to being a private again. But the things that I learned were shut up and you don't know anything, right? That's it. Don't say anything and don't know anything. Just listen to what they have to do. Be a sponge and learn and do. We come from a different generation of folks that want to try to climb this company ladder, work the same job for 20 years. That's my background, man. That's how I've been taught. So, I cleaned guns for a year. I went out and, assisted him on these events. I was basically the gopher. But I knew that this was just the step, right? I knew that this was the first step. Nothing in life that is good comes easy. So I did it. I sucked it up and I cleaned guns and I hit the road. And I did that for about a year under his wing. And finally he was like, all right, you're good to go, man. I think you know everything about it. You know about the guns, and if you'll figure it out. And he turned me loose and that the rest is history.
Well, I'll tell you what, we could probably create a mini series just out of your experiences. I'd love to have more time to talk. Let's boil down some things, some advice. Sure. Try to give us here a couple of lessons learned. If you could speak to a room with transitioning service members, say folks that are getting out in about 12 months, from what you've learned, your multiple transitions back to civilian employment, back to life, what would you say are some of the keys to success, or some of the advice that you would pass on to them?
Honestly, if you're wanting to stay within the defense industry, I would say that, keep those friends, because if you're in it, you're probably going to lean back on them again. So never burn your bridges. Make sure that everybody you meet out there, you get their information, you keep in contact with them. The defense industry really is an industry where you have to know people to get hired. And once you're in it, you're in it. So it's just, making friends, making the communication, making the contact, making an effort to actually help out other folks, seeking out veterans organizations, other veterans. There's a ton of them out there. So the veterans all help each other. While we all might be individual veterans, we're all in this industry and we're all helping each other out. So you go out and find those guys. We help you. He helps me. We all scratch each other's back. That's how it works. Yeah, for sure. Networking. And then the other thing is, don't be afraid to, if you're deciding to leave the industry, don't be afraid to find a different type of position. So for instance, one of the things that I originally came out was like, oh man, I've been doing all of these things as an operations NCO. Well, what can I do outside of the military that has to do with operations? There's a ton of things. I can be the director of operations. I can be a program manager. Just take what you've done. If you've moved beans and bullets and troops and fuel, dude, you can move frozen boxes of pasta or ice cream. You can do the same thing. Just change that mentality and figure out the details of what your job is, and then look at the civilian side and say, oh man, I did all of these things. This is the kind of a civilian job that those might work with. So don't be afraid to try to look at your resume. And then, one of the great tools is, tell you the truth, take your resume, dump it into like Chat GPT and use AI and summarize it, and then put it into it again and say, hey, what jobs work for these? And it'll spit you out a bunch of positions that you never even thought of. So don't be afraid to use technology. Don't be afraid to ask for help. And relationships. So those are my parting words, is relationships are everything. And don't be afraid to transition, pathways if that's what you need to do.
One last question, probably the one that I've been looking forward to asking most during this interview. You decided for the most part to stay within the bubble. For those that step out of the bubble into quote unquote normal civilian jobs, for lack of a better term, how important is the phrase "find your tribe"?
Man, it is. You either need to have some of those friends that you had before the military, some of those folks that are out of the military. If you've got a family, definitely that's somewhere that I chose to focus on family. My tribe is small. Okay. My tribe is small. But it's like that for a reason, because the people are in it are people that I trust with my life. And I think that tribe is, we're here. Like I tell you, all over LinkedIn, I scream it. If you need help, if you need somebody to talk to, if you need any advice on information, please, by all means, reach out to me on LinkedIn, because that's what we're here for. We are the community outside of the uniform, so that when you take it off, you can step into ours, and we're here to help you out.
Awesome. Well, as I said before, I wish we could go on for another hour or hour and a half. We still have tons of material to cover, but we've got to wrap it up. All right, folks, listen, if you haven't already done so, do yourself a solid and use the link rmvets.com/live. This is going to take you to our website where you'll find hundreds of thousands of job opportunities from more than 16,000 employers coast to coast, opportunities around the world and around the corner. We here at Recruit Military are on a mission to help veteran transition service members and mil spouses find meaningful employment opportunities. On behalf of Recruit Military and the folks decided to join us today, thank you, Andrew, for being with us.
Thank you, sir. Thanks for having me.
It was my pleasure. Trust me, I absolutely enjoyed it. And for the folks out there who enjoy the show, join us in just a few short weeks on May 22nd. Gabby and Raul will be back with a very special, as of yet unannounced, special surprise guest. So tune in. It'll be worth your time. This has been Lucas Connolly for Recruit Military Live. Until next time, good luck and Godspeed.
Thank you.